Terrific. Well, I'm excited to be gathering for this discussion today. Misty, do you usually wait a few minutes in case others arrive?
We can wait another minute or so and see if others arrive, and then, but I, obviously want to be respectful of people's time.
Okay. So yes, at 4:02 we'll start.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
All righty. Well, I have 4:02, so we want to make sure to have enough time to engage in our robust discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with this exciting session for the Family Virtual Learning Series with the Cato College of Education. We have some terrific guest speakers with us today that hopefully we all can learn a lot from. So this learning series is sponsored, as I just shared, by the Cato College of Education at UNC Charlotte and also by the Alumni Association at UNC Charlotte. And today we're excited to both have faculty as well as a student in the current program at UNC Charlotte and alumni. So it's a great combination of folks. My name is Clare Merlin-Knoblich. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling, and our three panelists today are Ms. Jenais Means, who's a PhD student in counselor education and supervision in the Department of Counseling at UNC Charlotte, Dr. Taryne Mingo, who's an assistant professor of counseling here at UNC Charlotte, and then Dr. Missy Moore, who is a current assistant professor in counseling at the University of Georgia, but who also is an alumna from our program. She graduated several years ago from the Counselor Education and Supervision PhD program. I'll allow each panelist to provide a little more background information on themselves and the expertise they bring in a moment. But today our topic is going to be wellness and resilience. And it might be helpful to understand the context we're in the Family Virtual Learning Series. So the purpose of this series is to provide strategies and support to help families, typically those with students all the way from preschool up until 12th grade, develop strategies to support them in remote learning. But we know that those strategies aren't just about academics, and that these days during the COVID-19 pandemic, we also really benefit from learning social emotional strategies, how to take care of ourselves, how to take care of our children or the adults that we live with in order to create a healthy environment for everyone. So today's session, as I mentioned, is about wellness, resilience, self-care, those topics that will help all of us learn how to ideally cope with the challenging environment that we're in. So these are the three learning goals that we have for any attendees joining us live or folks viewing this recording. We hope that you'll leave with a great understanding of what wellness is and what self-care means. We hope you'll also get to learn a lot of different examples about wellness practices, as well as how those practices can differ among different cultural groups. And we hope that in particular, you can leave today's meeting with some specific ideas for self-care practices that would be relevant to your life. We'll start with a brief overview to kind of set the stage. Then we'll have each panelist share their own experiences, their professional expertise, and their suggestions for wellness, resilience, and self-care. We'll wrap up with some resources and a reflection at the end. So you can see more specifically the three main topics that we'll be addressing. We are fortunate in that all of our panelists have experience clinically, so in the field, counseling children, adolescents, as well as adults. But then we also have some panelists with expertise in teaching about counseling topics and in doing research on these topics. So Jenais will in particular focus on wellness in practice and what she's seen in her many years of counseling work. Dr. Taryne Mingo will talk about self-care in practice, what she recommends to students, what she saw as a counselor in the field. And then Dr. Moore will focus on the research that she has completed on wellness and on preventing burnout. Before I get to our incredible panelists though, I did want to put some basic information here to give everyone a clear understanding on what these terms mean. So wellness really refers to one's holistic health, not just physical health, but a broad, general understanding of how one feels and all of the different factors that go into feeling healthy. So there are a lot of different models of wellness. You can easily find like a 5-factor model or an 8-factor model or even a 15-factor model. But in general, the different models of wellness include some of the components listed here. So they do include a focus on physical wellness, but they also include an emphasis on spiritual wellness, mental wellness, emotional wellness, intellectual wellness, and social wellness. And self-care is a term that we use a lot in the counseling field, which refers to those strategies that promote wellness. You can imagine that in our discipline, when we're teaching current and future counselors in particular, we know that they hear a lot of challenging stories. They often listen to traumatic examples and experiences from their clients and students. And so we talk to our counseling students about how they need to be mindful of self-care so they don't burn out as counselors. But the principles of wellness and self-care don't just refer to counselors, they refer to all of us. So it's useful to think about our holistic health and our wellness in all the areas listed here, even if we're not in a counseling profession. Maybe we work in a corporate position, or maybe we're staying home with children right now who are trying to learn remotely. Wellness matters for all of us. And as a reminder, I listed that point on the screen here in large font. So although the typical series in this virtual learning series have been specifically about how to support elementary, middle, and high school students, I want to clarify up front that this session is really about supporting all of us. So I hope that as you listen along to our panelists, you keep in mind not only how to promote wellness and self-care for maybe the children or adolescents that are living in your household, but also for yourself, how you can consider incorporating self-care practices so that maybe you can be a better parent, or you can be a better friend or a better sibling, and all of us can survive this pandemic with as much wellness as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, Jenais. Jenais is, as I mentioned, a PhD student at UNC Charlotte. Jenais, before we start talking about wellness and self-care, could you provide a little background information on your clinical experience?
Sure, I would love to. Right now, I have a private practice, and I'm working with people who are from age about 13 all the way to 70. So a wide range of people. Because of COVID, I'm not seeing anyone younger than 13, but I love working with people of all ages who have a variety of concerns happening in their life. So some of the conditions that people are in change from one week to the next. So there's no true focus on a particular concern, but anything that people bring to me. Lots of work with people who are on the schizophrenia spectrum, bipolar and related disorders, depression, anxiety, just a wide range of of all types of things that happen to people, whether it's environmental or something that happened because of some sort of trauma, or that's something that we're born with. So, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of diverse experiences in your clinical practice.
Absolutely. I would not have it any other way.
That's great. How would you define wellness and the role that wellness plays in, individuals' lives?
So I really liked your definition of wellness. I think of it as a mind, body, spirit connection, and not just oh, this part of my life is really good, so let me go and live the rest of my day. But that it's a progressive thing that changes, and that wellness looks different from one day to the next. So being able to stop and say, instead of saying I'm fine, which is the failure identifying necessary emotions, to say, wait a minute, mentally, I'm a bit cloudy today. Emotionally, I'm a bit sad today. Physically, I'm in a little bit of pain, or physically, I feel pretty good, or spiritually, I feel connected. But that wellness is truly being aware in mind, body, and spirit.
And among all the diverse clients that you have and you continue to work with, which of those different areas of wellness do you see as maybe most problematic, or the ones that aren't being addressed enough by people?
I think that people tend to gloss over the emotional wellness. I've noticed that people are okay being happy and being angry, but the other emotions, the sadness, that gets dismissed. Disgust gets dismissed. Surprise is okay when it's a good surprise, but when the surprise is, oh my gosh, my tire is flat, which brings about another set of emotions, that those things tend to be what's the most tough for people, is actually stopping and identifying, this is what's going on. This is what I am feeling. This is what I'm experiencing, and then engaging with it.
Yeah. I noticed that on this slide, you've listed some different types of stress that I assume are helpful to identify.
Yes, I would love to talk about that.
Please.
So one of the first things that I've noticed with people with kind of bringing the mind, body, spirit connection together is to pause and identify the type of stress that they're experiencing. So hypostress is what occurs when we feel bored. This is, I've got nothing to do, I'm uninspired. It's like, oh, sometimes we feel okay relaxing for a couple hours, and then suddenly it stops feeling pretty good. We sometimes transition into that hypostress, that boredom. Then we've got distress. And when we're in distress, it's because we've got constant readjustments and alterations to our routine, which I know we've all experienced because of COVID and just because of life. So we can do that and wake up in the morning and have a lovely plan. And then the next thing you know, something has changed in 3 areas, and now we're in distress trying to figure out how to make things work. Then there's hyperstress, and hyperstress occurs when you're completely overloaded, overworked. We can't see how to sort things out. And you see hyperstress a lot in children, especially when they're trying to navigate school and online school, and they're trying to find documents in a particular place and how to turn in something, and their parents have chores that they need to do, and they're trying to keep up with their friends, and they just feel like there's so much happening at the same time. Then you've got eustress, which is considered the good stress, and people are good stress, what's that, right? But this is what happens when we are motivated. It's when you're a kid and you say, hey, can I go out? And your parents say, clean your room, and you can go. And the next thing you know, energy came out of nowhere, and that room is spotless. Or you want to hang out with friends later, and you're like, well, let me make sure I've got everything together so they can come over first. And it's that motivating, I can go and do this. And it feels good. And when we pause and say, okay, well, what is it am I feeling? Especially when we're like, I'm not really sure. Is this hypostress? Is this distress? Is this good stress? It's very empowering. It lets us know a starting place of what do I need to do next in order to make myself a little bit more well.
That's a terrific framework to help all of us kind of understand when we're feeling stressed the different dimensions, right? To be able
Yeah.
to pick it apart and maybe even use it to be beneficial, like in eustress. So I see that you mentioned here the importance of setting helpful expectations and forming one habit at a time. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, those two things are very connected. So sometimes we will get in a place where we're aware of where our wellness is, and then we make a beautiful plan. Anybody ever been there? We're like, okay, I see what's happening. It's not that great, but I've got a plan. I've got a plan. And so sometimes our plan is beautiful if nothing in the world is ever going to happen or disrupt us. We're going to start running. We're going to meal prep. We're going to meditate in the morning and everything. We're going to meditate in the middle of the day and it'll all be great. I've got it. And so while it sounds wonderful and you know you can do it, it might not be the most helpful set of expectations. Because sometimes what we're also saying to ourselves is, I haven't been doing any of these things, but tomorrow I'm going to do all of them. And that then creates, guess what? Distress and hyper stress. It doesn't create that good stress of I can do it. So we want to set appropriate expectations. If you want to meal prepping starts at thinking about what you want for dinner, maybe at breakfast, or checking the refrigerator, the cabinets to see what's available so you know what you can make later versus I'm going to make this meal, I'm going to divvy it up in all these containers and make the refrigerator look like a photo. So we want to do things that are going to be helpful for ourselves. And that's where that forming one habit at a time comes in. That's where we go, okay, I do want to do these 4 things. Let's start with one. How can I make sure that my body, my soul, my spirit are all working together on this one habit at a time? So 21 to 30 days, maybe just working on if you're going to add exercise a few times a week versus trying to do every single thing at a time. Because sometimes our wellness goals turn out to be stress goals. And if we're trying to have a stress goal, then congratulations, you're successful with it. But that's typically not what we set out to do in the beginning. We set out to do something that's going to increase our wellness. Yeah.
Seems like really valuable feedback. I think I'm going to try and adopt some of that myself. I appreciate it.
Please. The last thing that I would leave you all with is, again, that wellness is absolutely progressive. There is no stopping point. We don't wake up one day and say, my goodness, I'm completely well. Done. We have to work through it. So every day, sometimes every few minutes, every couple hours or weeks, we have to remind ourselves that we are working towards wellness, that it's both present and progressive.
I like that reminder too. I heard one time that in the field of yoga, for example, they use the term practice intentionally, like I'm going to go practice yoga. It seems similar here, that we're practicing wellness. We're never experts at it.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's terrific. Jenais, I do have one final question for you, and that is, I know you've seen a lot of different clients and diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, age, religion. Have you noticed any differences among clients in their approaches to wellness in terms of their cultural identities?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest things I notice is that persons who are from a particular culture that value talk therapy, or who are part of cultures that are very like individual and not necessarily the collective of this family and this group, we solve things together, that the more individual type of culture is all for sitting down and speaking with someone regarding their mental health or their overall wellness. But some of the persons who are part of cultures that are very, very family oriented, sometimes religious based, are a little bit more hesitant to sit down with an individual and express what's going on. This is definitely a big difference there. But the other thing I've also noticed that as generations continue to form, that younger persons, whether they're a part of a family group that's more of a collective unit, are seeking out wellness services. So I think times are absolutely changing.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, because we of course believe that counseling not only helps support mental wellness, but also that emotional wellness or sometimes the spiritual wellness and the other dimensions.
I think it's important for all helpers to reach out to other types of helpers and work together through things, whether it's a community center, whether it's a religious center. If we get together and offer programs like this one, then more persons will have access to know, okay, well, this is what wellness looks like. And maybe I can start seeing someone or a group of people can get together and work on wellness together.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your expertise with us. We really appreciate it.
Problem. Thank you for having me.
So next, I've invited Dr. Taryne Mingo, a colleague of mine in our Department of Counseling at UNC Charlotte, to speak about wellness and self-care in particular. Dr. Mingo, do you want to start with a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invite to be a part of this conversation. So prior to arriving to UNC Charlotte as an assistant professor in fall of 2018, I'm a former elementary school counselor in a very rural district in Georgia, where I use a lot of those experiences in my current practice with training school counseling graduate students by using a lot of my learned experiences, particular to self-care, the do's and don'ts when you're in a profession working with children and adolescents. So I, upon graduating from my doc program in 2015, I then became an assistant professor after my school counseling years at Missouri State University, in which I'll talk about that as well in terms of how to also practice self-care when you're in a situation that you can't leave or where there's a stressful situation that you can't escape from. So yes, I have emphasized heavily in teaching practices for our counseling students and then our school counseling students about what that looks like when you are in a position where people come to you, you're a counselor, you have the title of counselor. And so therefore you are here to solve my problems. That extends to even, I think, family members. When you tell them you're a counselor, it's okay, so that means I can bring my problems to you. So then that means working with our students on what does that mean for you to continue to show up for your students and those that you're helping. So I feel like a lot of my teaching practices operates from two lenses, that from, you know, being a school counselor and then also being an assistant professor in an environment where I had to actively engage in self-care and bring that home a little bit more.
Yeah. Dr. Mingo, I think of you as like a champion for self-care, you know, among our students and among our colleagues. And that, you know, that's not to say that you're encouraging us not to work, because I think you probably work more than all of us. But I always appreciate your emphasis on self-care and how it's an investment in our work as counselors, or even if you're not in counseling, it's an investment in being, like I said, a better friend or a better parent. How would you define self-care for people unfamiliar with the term?
So the biggest way that I've talked to our students about self-care is making sure it is guilt-free. Put yourself first, because I tell our students that it does you no good if you are giving yourself the time you need but feeling guilty about it. So it has to be guilt-free. You have to really put yourself first, because at the end of the day, I've always used the the phrase that health is wealth. Right? So you have to take care of yourself. And so I also share with our students, I'm one of personal experience and one of witnessing situations where personally, my first year as a school counselor, I always prided myself on being able to deal with issues and leave them at the school building and go home, except for what I started noticing after my first couple months of helping students in very traumatic situations, helping students who were being removed from homes, helping them bag their clothes, that was coming home with me. And I found myself, I said, why am I going through so many bags of Doritos, family-sized Doritos? And I couldn't figure out why I was doing that until I realized I am actually taking this home with me. So I was able to personally, for me, doesn't work for everybody, but I found a group of individuals who were into, walking. And so through our walking and connecting with one another, we were all in different places in our lives and different abilities. We all signed up for a 5K together. This kicked off into a 10K, kicked off to a half marathon, kicked off to a full marathon, and we are still running with each other. And then that has been my personal self-care work when it comes to, working with clients who are going through a trauma. And it really helps me throughout my school counseling career. So again, counseling, running's not for everyone, but if you can find that connection, something to help you escape that stress or, move away from it so that you can leave it someplace, it can be really helpful. And for me, running was only about getting from point A to point B, and everything else that I dealt with during the school day, I could leave it behind me. And then I also share with our students, in terms of witnessing what it means to put yourself first, self-care. That I talk about working with a colleague of mine at the school where I was a school counselor who had been there for 33 years, had gone through a number of health battles, health issues, and she finally retired. And upon retiring, our administration offered her a sheet cake. And I won't go into a whole thing on sheet cake. That's just my personal, like y'all could have gone to a bakery, right? So they gave her a sheet cake and they gave her 2 big jugs of Hawaiian fruit punch. This woman gave 33 years of her life to this position. Now, fortunately, she is someone who was able to say, you know what? I did the best I can. I was grateful for the work that I did on behalf of students. And we took her out and we celebrated with her appropriately afterwards. But I bring that up to our students to say, it is eye-opening, or at least it was eye-opening for me as a new school counselor to say, here's what someone gave of themselves every day. And then here's how it was appreciated by those very same individuals. So I think it's pretty common that we hear they'll replace you like that. So make sure you are mindful to put yourself first. So then to answer your question, Dr. Merlin, what is self-care? It's putting yourself first, guilt-free. So you have to be very mindful of, it doesn't mean that I don't care about the students that I serve during the day, but in order for me to show up for them the next day, I had to put my needs first.
Makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of a story another colleague of ours once told me about a faculty member at UNC Charlotte who similarly had given decades and decades of her career to our department and had, written lots of publications and taught all of the courses. And my colleague pointed out to me that right now that the retired colleague's resume or curriculum vitae is just sitting in a drawer, right? And that she was pleased that the colleague had taken time for herself throughout her life, but yeah, at the end of our careers, our impact is going to be measured in different ways. And so putting ourselves first probably shouldn't be overlooked.
Right.
Given that.
And then the goal and the other pieces, especially for our school counseling students, I tell them, make sure you are not in this place where you're just trying to get to the weekend, or you're just trying to get to the next holiday break, or you're just trying to get to summer, because that's you kind of wishing your time away. So find those carrots in each day that is motivating you when it's a stressful day. Because I've never wanted to look back and be like, where did my time go? So, making sure students are in a position that makes them happy, that keeps them going forward, and they give themselves those carrots, frequent carrots along the way. Because I felt as Jenais was talking, I kind of felt seen in that moment when she talked about being a planner, because I was like, that's totally me. I am that person. I will create a beautiful spreadsheet of I'm doing this at this time, this time, this time, this time. And then it doesn't get done. So by having those carrots, it may be something as simple as I have a colleague or a work member say, you know what, Tuesday, 5 p.m., let's talk. And it just may be a venting session. I tell students, self-care doesn't have to be spending all this money on your hair or nails or anything else. It might just be sitting and staring at a blank wall if that's what you need in that time. It does not have to cost you money. But whatever you need to recharge. I'm an introverted person. So for me, a recharge means being away from people. So giving yourself that time to have that moment to recharge, and it shouldn't have to cost any money. But being very mindful that your health needs to be at the forefront of taking care of yourself to continue to help others.
you mentioned running and you just mentioned staring at a blank wall. What other strategies have you used or have you seen students or even colleagues using over the years to engage in self-care?
So I will say that, again, drawing on my personal experience, as I mentioned before, I had to relearn a different version of self-care by being in an environment that I couldn't escape. So when I was a school counselor, I could escape and find that place of self-fulfillment. When I was in a new location, surrounded by different changes where I couldn't escape that stress, because sometimes that is difficult. And I think that's important to acknowledge that sometimes you can't escape the stress that you're in. So what do you do in that moment? So one of the things that I have found is relationships. And so having, finding those individuals that you can connect with in that space of stress can be super motivating. So it may just be through self-care conversations with the person, setting boundaries with that stressful environment. I also told students, now that we're in this new virtual setting, that oftentimes people think it's okay to have access to you for 24 hours. Even though you're at home, set your time, 10 a.m., stop responding to email at 5 p.m., stop taking emails and phone calls, and be very vigilant about setting those boundaries. And also challenging unhealthy work environments. I think it's also important to acknowledge, I know at least one of the experiences that I had as a school counselor were those students who were praised for staying well beyond our time to leave. So even though it was okay for us to leave at 3:30, frequently we would have, Miss so-and-so, was here till 5 p.m. No, we have to challenge those things that are a challenge to our health, that we have a right to take care of ourselves at the end of the day, especially when my contract said 3:30 was when I could leave. So those are examples that I definitely share with students on, if running is not your thing, setting boundaries, challenging those unhealthy work environments that you can't escape from, being willing to speak up for yourself. You got one body, so you want to take care of it.
I have one final question for you, and that is, I know that in my experience, whether I've been talking to family members or students about self-care, sometimes there's a resistance to it. Like there is that guilt you mentioned or the discomfort. And so what recommendations do you have for us to move past the discomfort?
Ooh, that's a good one. So practice it. So you have to practice it. So in one of our courses, I actually have students say, like for instance, we have the holidays coming up, right? So let's kind of actually act out what that might look like. What is your response? Go ahead and have a pre-planned response. If you're someone who likes to do journaling, do journaling. But I have found that some students like to have a plan going into stressful environments or things that may make them feel guilty, such as in instances where they might want to be safe during these holidays, and maybe there's a family member making them feel guilty about not wanting to interact or get close. So I would definitely say practicing those conversations, because again, you have to take care of you so that you can continue to show up and be there for others. So that would be one recommendation, is to, if it's uncomfortable and it's awkward and others are making you feel guilty, advocating for yourself, sometimes we just have to practice that over and over again, and make sure again, those relationships, those support systems that will be there for you to reaffirm your stance on those things.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more we can practice the advocacy, the more comfortable it gets.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mingo. Really appreciate your insights. So lastly, I'm excited to speak with Dr. Missy Moore. She is currently an assistant professor at the University of Georgia, and as I mentioned earlier, an alumna from UNC Charlotte's Counselor Education and Supervision PhD program. Dr. Moore, it is a treat to get to speak with you today. Do you want to begin with a little background information about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I've been really enjoying this conversation. And if y'all can see me in my square, I've been vigorously nodding my head in support. So thank you so much for having me join with y'all. My background, I am a mental health counselor, and I have worked in school-based settings and agency settings in employee assistance, where I've worked specifically with work-related issues impacting mental health. And since then, I have been an assistant professor at the University of Georgia, where I teach counselors in training as well as counselor educators in training. And in particular, I study stress and burnout and all of the things that make us unwell, as well as the things that make us well. And I am excited to share some of the things I've learned along my journey, both in practice, but also in research as well.
Terrific. Well, teach us, help us understand, what does the research say about wellness or the importance of self-care that would be really useful for us to know moving forward?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, there are so many models of wellness. And if you read anything, it talks about the million stressors we encounter on a daily basis. And if you'll see on this slide, I have included what is called a paradigm of wellness, and it's the ISWELL model. And when I think of wellness, I think of everything that Jenais and Dr. Mingo said earlier, that it is this continual process and effort that we make towards making ourselves reach that optimal health as well as wholeness. And if we think of ourselves as a whole individual, but also having components, you can see that we encounter things all of the time that kind of chip away at pieces of ourselves, which ultimately decreases our wellness. So in this model, there are 5 core selves that help us become this whole person. We have a coping self that's made up of things like the leisure things we do, our self-worth, the ways we manage stress. There's our physical self, which is everything you can imagine, exercise, nutrition, all of the ways we take care of our bodies. Our social self, anything related to love or friendship or how we interact with our community. Our creative self, and this actually captures our work as well as things like humor, the things we like to do, emotions. And then our essential self is kind of the spiritual piece, the self-care that we give and our identity. And the reason why I included this on this slide is when we think about stress, particularly right now, we've had almost every aspect of ourselves completely overhauled during this pandemic. Anything related to leisure has been completely altered. Maybe we can't do it at all. Nutrition, we see a lot of food insecurity or undernutrition just with what's available. Social self, it's very difficult to interact with others. We also see differences in family planning or how we see friends. Our creative self, if we think about our work, we see many people who are underemployed or unemployed, or even those who are going to work that don't feel safe at times. And then other things that make us who we are, our identities. Maybe we have had to quarantine with people that don't fully support this aspect of ourselves. So when we think about wellness and self-care and all of these things we're talking about, we also have to talk about all these things that kind of chip away at these pieces of us.
It's really powerful. I mean, it's challenging to recognize and to hear you go through each of those elements and how they are so specifically impacted by the pandemic. But I still think the paradigm is useful for us to make sense of. Do you have suggestions based on your own experiences or research on how we can still incorporate self-care with each of these parts of the self in spite of the pandemic?
Yes, I do. And I think first and foremost, when we think about each of these things and even self-care in general, we've kind of moved as a society to talk about these as buzzwords, and everyone should know what self-care means and all of these things I just listed. It's like we have this common definition. So the first step of things we can do is to recognize that it really is truly an individual process that we have to assess. And that goes with assessing your environment as well. So for some of you, you may be really strong in your physical self and even your social self right now and struggling in the others. So the first piece is to kind of rate yourself maybe on a 1 to 10. How satisfied am I with my coping self right now? How satisfied am I with my creative self? And if you're a little bit lower than where you want to be, then that's the first place to step in. So in spite of the pandemic and other things we are seeing in this world, some types of things you can do. If we think about at least what we see in the research, some of the most powerful things we can do to prevent burnout involve self-acceptance. So these are all things related to being comfortable with your identity, caring for who you truly are, being able to tap into any kind of spiritual self. These things are essential with burnout. We also find things like social resourcefulness. So this doesn't necessarily just mean I have a lot of friends and I can talk to them when I need to, but it's also I can be a good friend. I know how to ask for help. I can tap into my resources when I need to. So all of these things that we see in the general world, despite the pandemic and other things, can also be applied now.
That's really helpful to understand. What should we know about how this paradigm might differ among different cultural groups?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to looking at different risk factors. So if we think of people being resilient, say it's like a plant growing in a harsh environment, then the plant is still growing, but it has to be able to adapt to any kind of stress in order to keep growing. And we see this with diverse groups that encounter different kinds of risk factors depending on what's going on in their personal life. So things like, I used the food insecurity example earlier, anything like, say, a refugee population, they encounter a ton of acculturative related stress, and they may not have social contacts that can help them get to different places or make those connections that they need to make. So recognizing that particular groups face particular issues can also help with the wellness process and the self-care.
Yeah, that seems really important for each of us to consider, both I think for the groups that we do identify with, and then the ones that we might not identify with who are encountering different types of stress or impacts to their wellness these days.
I'd also like to add, and this is something when we talk about stress and resources and prevention, when I talk about with my students, they work in a cohort model. And if we think about all of us kind of existing on a continuum of wellness and stress and self-care, that if we have some kind of cohort in our lives where maybe I'm really struggling with coping right now, but I'm really strong in my physical self. How can other people rely on me where I feel strong? And how can I rely on these other people where I feel not as strong? And taking that to apply in general. This could be our families, this could be our work communities. How can we use the people around us to really build us up in these different areas?
I love that idea. Well, lastly, Dr. Moore, in addition to the research you've conducted or you're familiar with, do you have any other practical suggestions for wellness and self-care that maybe you have seen in your students or your clients or colleagues during this time?
Yeah, I would, this kind of relates back to some of the other things that have been said, but I cannot stress enough just honoring where you're at and getting back to the basics, things like prioritizing your sleep and drinking enough water, getting out in the sunshine, finding any creative outlet, just things like this that we consider to be the basic forms of self-care, but those are the first things to go in times of stress. So when everything is changing and we're completely revisioning these core selves of ours, really getting back to those key essential things that we can build into this new existence, I think is really important.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Well, I have some closing thoughts here. In a moment, I'll ask our panelists for any final suggestions or closing thoughts they have. But I'll reiterate that wellness has multiple components. So sometimes I think it's over-identified with just the physical wellness, but that it's helpful to realize sometimes our occupational wellness or environmental wellness, emotional, spiritual, those components can have just as much an impact on us as our physical wellness. As our panelists have spoken to, wellness practices also can differ among different cultural groups. So like Dr. Moore said, the stressors can differ based on those cultural groupings. And as Jenais mentioned, the practices might differ too, in particular based on individualistic versus collectivist practices and cultures. And I think it can be useful to draw on the strengths of one's cultural groups when it comes to wellness, and then recognize if there are also any challenges given different cultural groups that you identify with or others close to you identify with. Overall, I view self-care strategies really as an investment in wellness. So I tell my students all the time that when I was a school counselor, I erroneously thought that self-care was just for those counselors who needed it. That it was just for those, parents who were extra stressed, or for my family members who weren't very good at coping. And what I came to realize was that it's for all of us, and that it truly is an investment in wellness. Just like going to the gym might be an investment in my physical health, meditating is an investment in my mental health, or going to counseling is an investment in my emotional health. And it certainly is worth that investment for the payoff. And again, everyone benefits from those self-care strategies. It's not being indulgent, it's not being selfish, it's not being lazy, but really it's helping us be better people, whether our primary identifications are as counselors or parents or children and adolescents, or friends, colleagues, and neighbors. So I'd ask each of our three panelists to share any closing thoughts or reminders that you think would be helpful for us to keep in mind in addition to these.
I would say to allow yourself and others a little bit of grace. If one day doesn't feel quite as well as the day before, instead of looking at ourselves and being upset about it, but saying, I recognize this is where I am today, and giving yourself and some others some grace to not have everything all together.
It's a great reminder.
I would say this is a conversation that we had last night with some of our students, that during this time of a global pandemic, be very honest about your emotions. And it is, and honestly, I push, do not normalize what is not normal. And so pushing against this sort of toxic positivity, where we're supposed to pretend that everything is fine and everything is running just as it did at this time in 2019 when it wasn't, is an unhealthy expectation. And so I encourage our students, specifically those who are in schools that are still trying to operate off of a normal schedule when things are not normal and things are not fair, to continue to speak out against that. No, this is not normal. This is not normal. And how much that can be healthy for you to, at least acknowledge what is real, and then do what you need to take care of yourself. Because if we're all pretending that this is normal, then that just continues to feed this sort of unhealthy lifestyle to maintain a pace that we were not in last year, that we're in now. So just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Toxic positivity. Hadn't thought about that until now, but it makes a lot of sense.
I would add in as well, when thinking about setting boundaries around your self-care and your wellness, if you do receive that pushback or any kind of resistance, it says way more about the other person than it does about you. And to keep it central on what you are doing and keeping in your own lane, I think can help you work more towards your practice intentionally, and towards your own wellness, and just keeping it centralized into what you're actually doing versus how you're making someone else feel or how you're being perceived from someone else.
It's great advice. Yeah, not to get distracted by them. Thank you so much. You all are extraordinary with your recommendations. I really appreciate it. We did want to share some resources with those of you either with us live or watching this recording. So on the screen, you can see a few websites. Providence.org has some great tips on mental, physical, and community wellness. So if you go to their website, you can get a lot more ideas, specific suggestions, strategies, and information about the importance for wellness. IntegrativeTouch.org is a website that has particular, they have a lot of wellness tips, but they have a great robust section on wellness tips for children too, with ideas about using breath work for meditation and other developmentally appropriate activities that can help children consider various aspects of wellness. And then counseling.org is the website for the American Counseling Association. All of the folks on this panel today have a background in counseling, and counseling is a profession that was founded on wellness rather than a medical model, which we see in some of the other helping professionals or professions. Counseling firmly believes in the importance of wellness and developmentally normal concerns that come up, and focuses on how counselors can use their roles to support wellness for their clients, students, neighbors, friends, and community. This is the last of the Family Virtual Learning Series panels for 2020. I know that Dr. Misty Hathcock is busy at work planning future panels, and they'll resume in February of next year. You can see the website there. And lastly, thank you so much for attending, and a tremendous thank you to our three panelists. All of our email addresses are on the screen if you have any questions at all or want to reach out to us for additional information. But thank you to our panelists, and thank you to those who are watching right now. We appreciate you being in attendance, and good luck with your wellness.
I would like to say thank you, Claire, and as well as Taryne, Jenais, and Missy. What a way to end on a high note. What a way to end our the Family Virtual Learning Series. You've given us so much information for us to think about and know that what we're feeling is okay. You know, in this time that we're living in. And so thank you so very much for your time. And I hope that everyone, please be safe and be well, and go Niners.
Go Niners.